You're listening to After Images, a podcast for cinephiles that takes a deep dive into moving images. Each episode features a special guest who is invited to explore a film of their choice. After Images is hosted by film writers Frank Bouleg and Marisa C. Hayes.
Some would like us to believe that this episode of After Images is our 17th, but that would be telling. It's a podcast, not a number. We are now going to the village to explore the ins and outs of the 1967 British television series The Prisoner, created by Patrick McGoohan. Imprisoned in a strange coastal village, whose exact location appears to defy reason, McGoohan plays the role of an intelligence agent who has recently resigned and been kidnapped. He is now known as Number 6 in this Baroque environment where everyone's identity is a number. The forces ruling the village want Number 6 to give them information about why he resigned, but he resolutely refuses to reveal any information and does his very best to escape this open-air prison. The village's Number 2s, or second in command, keep rotating, each one devising a new Machiavellian plan to extract information from Number 6. For his part, Number 6 keeps wondering, who is Number 1? Brilliantly shot and edited, replete with political and philosophical undertones, The Prisoner is one of the best television series to have ever reached our screens. On this episode of After Images podcast, we welcome Gary Lachman.
Gary Lachman is the author of many books about consciousness, culture, and the Western esoteric tradition, including Dreaming Ahead of Time, The Return of Holy Russia, Dark Star Rising, Magic and Power in the Age of Trump, Lost Knowledge of the Imagination, and Beyond the Robot, The Life and Work of Colin Wilson. He has written biographies of Carl Gustav Jung, Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, Emanuel Swedenborg, P.D. Ouspensky, and Aleister Crowley. He writes for several journals in the US, UK, and Europe, lectures around the world, and his work has been translated into more than a dozen languages. In a former life, he was a founding member of the pop group Blondie, and in 2006 was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Before moving to London in 1996 and becoming a full-time writer, Lachman studied philosophy, managed a metaphysical bookshop, taught English literature, and was science writer for UCLA. He is an adjunct professor of transformative studies at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He can be reached at GaryLachman.com or on Facebook or Twitter. Gary Lachman, we are delighted to have you with us today on After Images podcast to speak about The Prisoner.
Well, it's absolutely a pleasure to join you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for being here. And we usually like to begin with the question, why did you choose The Prisoner? What does it mean to you?
Well, when Frank first got in touch with me, just in general, what would I be interested in doing? I said in general, sort of, what about these 1960s British sort of spy or, espionage kind of pop, programs like The Avengers, Danger Man was one, Man in a Suitcase, and then The Prisoner. And then he said, well, let's just do, we try to focus on one thing, so let's just do the Prisoner. Oh yeah, I mean, I just remembered. I mean, I grew up with that on television. So I was about 12 years old, I think. Yeah, I was 68, so I would have been about 12. So this was in New Jersey, 1968, and it's probably the same year. I know I went with my father to see 2001, and his reaction as we walked out was, "What the hell was that all about?" So we had absolutely no idea. So I'm sure I didn't quite get it at the time when I saw it, because it wasn't, it certainly wasn't like Man from U.N.C.L.E. or, the other spy. I mean, The Avengers, I also was like, what, The Avengers? What? No, that's a comic book with Captain America. And then I realized, oh, no, I guess you can't copyright a title. So, and I always liked that, like, Steen and Mrs. Peel. Just that whole period. I mean, I have nostalgia for it because I grew up then, and then I subsequently wrote a book about the 1960s, not specifically about The Prisoner or anything like that, but about how much of the pop culture at that time was influenced by rather strange occult or mystical ideas. I don't know if The Prisoner kind of floats in there at all. But there is, some in places we could say, I mean, not necessarily occult in any way like that, but certainly sort of, ideas about identity and consciousness and all that. And then there's the strange, the Christian be seen you sort of thing, which maybe at a stretch you might, I was thinking, oh, can we link that to a kind of Gnostic kind of, because he's living in a false world, and that's sort of the early Christians. I say this because the early Christians, well, the very early Christians around the same time before the Petrine Church took over, the one that McGoohan himself, was, very much a firm believer in. He was a very staunch Catholic. So the Gnostics would have been the bad guys because they were this heretical sect who, it was rather than believe in Jesus as the literal person, this happened to him and he saved you. It's like, no, we all go through this kind of transformative experience in some way, and gnosis in the sense of having true spiritual knowledge. But they, there was competition in the early days, and I somehow wondered, maybe just unconsciously, he not that he thought of it, because I'm not seeing that reference in there at all. Although the reference to living in a simulated world or unreal world or something, which we're all very familiar with today, but back then was strange. But that is something that the early Gnostics of the Christian time talked about. So I don't know. This is very left field, but that I was just, in any case, that's basically, I just grew up during that time when this prisoner was, something that was on television. Back in the day when you had to be at a certain place at a certain time in order to watch something too. So it was a very, very different experience than today. You had to be, it was in the old Cartesian grid, you had to be in a certain space and time to be able to watch this program. So very strange sort of thing. My children well, they're not children anymore, they're in their 20s now, but they grew up that's not like that. So any case, yeah, so I had a personal childhood, interest in that stuff, and then subsequently I wrote about it. So that's pretty much why it came to me.
Do you think this TV series could have been created at another moment in time than the 1960s?
No, I think it's very, very 1960s. I mean, it reminds me of other things in that period, like the film The 10th Victim with Mastriani and was it Ursula Andress? Yeah. So strange dystopian science fiction film where murder is a sport and all of that. But it's very pop. It has all that. I mean, people today say, "Oh, this is art house." It's like, no, it's a science fiction film from the 60s, but they call it art house. And so it shares with that. And then, I guess like Fahrenheit 451 and things of that sort. So no, it's very 60s. And I think it bends. I think the last few episodes kind of say, well, this is really, we get into kooky 60s world, and it's kind of, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's annoying, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, well, he's getting away with stuff on, primetime television and in America too. It is very, very strange. Because that's one of the things I think today. I mean, I've lived in London now for quite some time, and I've gone back and watched both, The Prisoner and the Avengers and Man in the Suitcase, but also, Man from U.N.C.L.E. and I Spy and some of the other Mission Impossible and this. I mean, something like Man from U.N.C.L.E. I really loved when I was a kid, but it doesn't hold up for me today when I watch those episodes. I mean, I like Ilya Kuryakin, and he's the black, turtleneck, and Robert Vaughan's a bit suave, chauvinist sort of, but the British ones tend to have, there's something more happening. I don't know what it is. It's a little more intelligence. And I mean, The Avengers too is another series which, like, Danger Man. I mean, in America that was Secret Agent Man, but in Danger Man it's black and white, and it's rather grim and gritty. Maybe later episodes, I mean, like the last few that were in color, Hiroshi, and it's got a bit more of the poppy element in it. But The Avengers started out, like that, the early ones with Honor Blackman, and then you get Emma Peel, then it in color, and then it's like it's pop land, it's, the Carnaby Row and the psychedelics hit sort of in a way, and everything gets very strange. So it's all, part of that kind of blend. So I don't think, and I'm very, very glad no one's, or there hasn't, or I think there has been a couple attempts at remakes, but they're not particularly successful. I mean, that Avengers film was dreadful. I mean, remember I did watch it some years ago. It was absolutely dreadful. So no.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned counterculture, and I hope we'll come back to that theme. But just maybe continuing on the theme of the series of the era, I'm thinking a lot about Danger Man and the links to that and The Prisoner, and that in some ways they feel like one continuation, even though there are marked differences, of course, and one of the major ones being from going in black and white to color. But knowing that Port Marion, the location of The Prisoner, already featured in one of the Danger Man episodes, and the fact that Patrick McGoohan was the leading man. How do you read the links between the two series? Do you see continuation between them, or do you really think of them as distinct projects?
No, I mean, well, it's no, I assume in some way it is Drake, but I understand that they don't. There's different reasons they say, the royalties they would have had to pay. What's Ralph Smart or the royalties, and also, we're not sure whether number six is a spy or not. I mean, Alex Cox, I read his book about the series, and he's sort of, I mean, I don't want to give it away, but he says, no, he's a rocket scientist, and that's what he is. And, and so, and I think even McGoohan said in some interview that, Drake would have got out of Port Marion much earlier than blah, 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 blah. But then there are scenes where he's like, he's very physical. I mean, he doesn't get, most rocket scientists, I mean, not that I know too many, but you don't get the impression that they can beat up a couple of the guys, after and engage successfully in koshu and things of that sort. So I don't know. So, but I guess that's all part of it. I mean, that's like, don't give it away. I mean, it is or it isn't, or isn't it? But that's whole part of what the idea of the person's about. You're unsure. I mean, it was very much ahead of its time in the sense that the whole epistemological uncertainty under which we have been living for the last, decade at least, at least widely in the public, I would say that has been the case in the higher kind of levels of academia for a long time. Around the same time, maybe as The Prisoner was coming out, right? You get, postmodernism beginning, you get, Foucault and Derrida, and the whole sort of idea that, reality is very ambiguous, it isn't stable, and all this kind of thing. So I'm not saying there's a connection, but there is a sort of, that academic version of it was way in the background. It took some time for it to trickle down. That's what I call trickle down metaphysics, trickle down to the mainstream. But, McGoohan in The Prisoner, he was dealing with that already. The ambiguity of and there's no easy answer. You don't really know. I mean, that's the whole thing. I came away with thinking like, okay, well, yeah, at the end, what happens? Was it all for him to get up higher up in the echelons of this place that he was in some way? Has he now like become part of it, but in a position of power? We don't quite know. And I think, that could have been a lucky hit. We got to get this thing done, guys. Okay, lock the door. I got the champagne. I'm going to write this thing and just pick it up in the morning. Okay, that's it. This is what happens, and it's like, oh, well, it doesn't really gel. That's perfect. That's exactly what the show's about. So, or it was all planned. But I think we come away not knowing. It's a very effective, no, I think he introduced a kind of, a very radical ambiguity into popular, media that normally doesn't accept that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I find that interesting that Umberto Eco's book, The Open Work, was published right around the same time that The Prisoner was released. And this is before, of course, he went on to become celebrated for semiotics. He was really looking at this kind of modernism that encouraged interactivity and had this level of ambiguity where it was up to the reader or the viewer to really think about and interact with the work of art and form their own ideas. And he always links that to a kind of countercultural movement of trying to break up or go against some kind of pre-existing barrier. So I just wonder what you think about that. You've already mentioned a little bit that your own interpretation or what the ending made you think of, but I'm just wondering what kind of tools you've used to think about the show, especially with your background in different Jungian.
Usually half a bottle of whatever I could afford that evening, and and say, okay, I kept it to watching one again an evening. So no, I just watch them, and I'm not really trying to deconstruct it or anything like that. It's sort of, as I said, I mean, first time I saw it was 1968 when I was about 12 years old, and then when I was living here over the years, I started collecting, DVDs and things of that, those ancient sorts of things. And I got those and all that in the Avengers. And I started, watching these things, which I hadn't seen, in quite some time. I mean, ITV had the Avengers on or something like that. So, I was remembering, how much I enjoyed these, and how they were just intelligent and I don't know. They did a lot with a little, whereas I think a lot of the shows in the States, you had a bigger budget and all that, but they come away not quite as interesting anymore. I mean, nostalgia's sake, but they don't. I'm not saying, oh yeah, yeah. Well, that's no. But when I was watching these, so no, it's very naive. I mean, I'm not. I wouldn't consider myself a semiotician or anything like that. I'm just watching it again and thinking, and there is obviously the change. When what is it, the last four, the first 13 more or less are kind of in the genre. Mark Stein wanted to keep it in, but then that fissures, and then they go off into this other theater of the absurd kind of land. And McGoohan. I mean, I read a biography of him. I think it's Rupert Booth, I think, and I mean, he comes across as a very serious individual, very earnest, a real actor, and I think he had a real serious intent to do something different. And I guess, I don't know. I guess with the success of Danger Man, I mean, because I watched that as Secret Agent Man, and again, one of the links between the two is it's in the States, it's a Johnny Rivers theme, but they've given you a number and taken away your name. It's there's a man who leads a life of danger, and it's a fantastic rock. It's one of the great rock tunes. It's a TV credit, it's the theme song for a TV show, but it's actually one of the great rock guitar lines. It's up there with the James Bond theme and all that. But it even says they've, given you a number and taken away your name. So that's a link between the two shows. But but that was a different show to me, because it's like he doesn't beat people up like, or he's not shooting the guns all the time as the other guys doing all that. He's using his brains most of the time, which was like Mission Impossible in a way, which was, to me, the States, it was kind of like that, because Mission Impossible, again, it's not beating them up and shooting and running and chasing a lot. It's like, okay, we have to, create a situation here. We want this to happen. So this is the situation we have to create in order to make this happen. So it was a more intelligent sort of approach. And Danger Man was sort of like that as well. And he's always a different person too, even though he's John Drake. When he goes into these different things, he adopts it's not like James Bond.
Yeah.
It's not one of the other shows that I liked at the time, but it's if it was the Saint, Roger Moore. And when I'm watching that recently, one of the fantastic things is wherever he goes, somebody knows, hey, isn't that something? Wherever he is, it's like somebody at the newsstand who's whatever, some ordinary person, which is it's just such a strange kind of theme or motif. It's like, yes, but with Drake, he's a different character. He adopts a different identity. Even there, he's sort of anonymous in the way that Number 6 is anonymous. It's a similar kind of situation there. And they also have the opening shots where he's driving around. The later series, I think, when it went to 50 minutes, The Danger Man, and I think in the States they didn't have the Johnny Rivers anymore, and they had this I forget who did the that theme music, but it's with like a harpsichord. It's partaking of this kind of Sergeant Peppery, if you know what I mean. There was a certain period in the mid 60s when kind of 1910 sounding or older sounding kind of music somehow was part of the psychedelic kind of thing, and it was this other theme, and it's showing most of the time, not in the Lotus, but in it's like a Mini or something, I don't know, but he's driving around and he's like a Trafalgar Square or something like that. So there's similar, echoes between the two. So I'm sure, I would think, if you ask me, yeah, it's the same character, but for a couple different reasons. Some negative, oh, we don't want to have to pay to use the name. Some, well, okay, we don't use the name, then let's never make it clear whether it is him or not, and keep that as a motif. That's part of the ambiguity. We don't know who he is. He doesn't know who number 1 is, but we don't really know who number 6 is. And obviously that's a theme that gets played, we're on a couple episodes. He doesn't know who he is, and he isn't him. He's the in Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, he's in a different body and all that, so yeah, I mean, all those kinds of doubling and sorts of things, once you start thinking about it, you can see them there. So
yes, this notion of identity is fundamental in The Prisoner, to the extent that one wonders if he truly knows himself who he is, as we find out in the last episode.
Well, I guess that's, and again, this is kind of it. This is a common theme for us with all the Philip K. Dick movies and all that. But it's well in advance, and it would have been something that would have been more. You would have found it more in, avant-garde theater, or off Broadway or something like that, or it's an existential kind of, characters. All these questions of identity and freedom. Are we free? Is it really, what would it mean? What does freedom mean? In the context of, where he is, is he ever free in the end? Again, the last, one of the last few things, when the door opens and the butler's there, and it's all like, okay, well, now you're back in London, back home, but it's pretty much, it's a home that seems to resemble the place you just left. And you've worked really hard to get here too. You've been through a lot to get back here too. I mean, it's very symbolic, the ending, where I mean, the whole thing's symbolic, but I mean, in a very kind of immediate way, where, the kind of what do you want to call it? The sort of top-hatted, tuxedoed hippie, character. He's trying to hitch a ride, and can't get one side, so he goes to the other side of the road. He's on the road, he's sort of, maybe a beat kind of character. Anywhere, man, I don't mind. But the other two have more of a, a direction where they want to go. And they both sort of, I guess Leo McKern picks up his, career. He goes on to be Rumpel. Bailey down the line. I've always liked his acting. He's in one of my favorite films, The Day the Earth Caught Fire. If you know that early 60s one. He wears these enormous black round glasses. He looks, it's just like, where did they find those, for him in that film? But he goes, he's back in Whitehall or wherever, something like that. And likewise, Peter Smith, or whoever he is, goes home, but he's got a butler. He's got an automatic door. So,
and I think it comes up to the question if the village is actually a place, or if it is more than a place, if it is a concept.
Well, it's sort of a microcosm of the larger context. I mean, one of the things that makes it absolutely 60s is, like, you could have the same setup without all the strange, banners and clothes and all that kind of thing. So that they could just be wearing whatever. If it's a holiday place, you could just be different people wearing T-shirts and sneakers and whatever like that. But it is sort of that. I'm just saying that's one of the things I think. Well, that's what makes it kind of a 60s. That kind of immediate kind of style choice. But yeah, it is I forgot. What was the question you asked that
I don't know if it was exactly a question. I think it was more, I was noting the fact that the village.
Oh yeah, is the village a place? Well,
Yeah.
I would say it's a microcosm of, because the bigger village, when he goes back into London, or the world now.
The global village.
The globe, I guess, that was in, the common, vernacular at the time, the notion of the global McGoohan and all that, the global village. So yeah, I mean, well, I guess that's the thing. Even the interviews I've read, doing a bit of homework on this, McGoohan always leaves it ambiguous, and he always says, and he even says, he questions the whole idea of freedom. We think we're free, but how are we? At the same time, I think he was someone who, the impression I get was that he he valued his own freedom very much. He took a lot of chances in that world, maybe demanding certain things. I mean, he gave up James Bond. I mean, what would he have been good at James Bond? I don't know. I mean, I wonder. But maybe he would have been. I don't know. But Connery went on to I guess you could say a larger career than McGoohan did after The Prisoner, although he was in some films, but yeah, not in the same thing. So he's somebody who decided things for himself. So there's a certain kind of freedom that he exercised. So maybe it's more of a warning, like, don't take your freedom for granted. It's something that you have to question. Again, which is the existential sort of thing. We fall, into bad faith or something. We fall into some form of complacency and accept things. This is how it is. This is what they say. This is how it is, rather than like, well, no, actually, I'm burdened with the responsibility of making choices. And yes, it's very attractive to give that, obligation over to someone else. But if I want to actually exercise my freedom, I have to take that on, and that sort of thing. And it seems maybe that's the message. Maybe it's a wake-up call to that. That's what in the end, that's what I came away kind of thinking. Don't take it for free. Yeah, I've escaped the village, but you can take the prisoner out of the village, but you can't take the village out of the prisoner, maybe, because then he's brought it back, to the bigger village. So it's a kind of warning, I would say.
And are there particular episodes among the 17 episodes that we see, plus the one alternate episode that we now have access to? Do you have, I won't say do you have one, because I think it's too hard to choose just one. Do you have several that really stand out to you that are personal favorites?
Well, I thought the Schizoid Man one was, again, this is dealing with the whole identity kind of thing. And then it gets, convoluted, where he's trying to convince them that he's the other guy, trying to convince them that he's him, sort of thing. So you get all those different layers, and that theme gets played out there. And yeah, I mean, there's some well, Chimes of Big Ben too. I thought that the whole relationship between him and the woman, the other, one who's trying to escape. And there's that fantastic scene where they're in the box and they've got the partition between them, but it's a very, very intimate kind of scene. But again, that's the same, do we ever really connect with the other, in that way? Or are we always separated in our own compartment? Do we ever, and again, all the relationships that he forms with people there turn out to be not, but again, when is that not when is that not the case? Not necessarily they turn out to be false, but they turn out to be different than you think they may be, and all that. And this is so well, the ones with Leo McKern, I also, because I think he and McGoohan really worked well together. They both have an intensity, I would say, in times. I don't know. I was going to be cliche and say McKern's sort of Shakespearean, but I don't know if McGoohan isn't as well. But there is this kind of broader kind of thing about, with Leo McKern in times. And I think, McGoohan's kind of this granite kind of thing all the time. He's just really hard. He's really, really hard. Although, reading this biography of him, apparently did comedy well.
Mm.
and some of the when he was in rep and all of that. So it's yeah, I mean those episodes I found. I mean, so there's the early one, and then there's the what is it? The last two, I guess.
Yeah.
It's when he's subject to degree absolute, which sounds like something the Inquisition would,
It's not
okay,
orange alert, but
we have put this off as long as possible, but now it's unavoidable. It's degree absolute, and it's like knock down, drag out. This is it, and again, the whole other thing too, like the end of that, where they're driving away, right, in the thing that's a cage, right? That it's taking them to their freedom.
Yes,
So they're
yes.
driving away in a cage from the village they've escaped, but it's what's so again, it's all.
Yeah.
And what it's done is how many years later? It has us here talking about it, and asking these kinds of questions. And it was a pop TV show too.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how this show was so entertaining and so philosophical at the same time that you could anyway analyze it from a philosophical perspective, even while on the surface it was so popish
And accessible.
and accessible too. And I was wondering, we talked about the fact that it is very ingrained in the 1960s, but according to you, what would be an interesting way to transfer this show to our times? Because, it has so much about trust and paranoia. What would that be in the context of the 21st century with the internet, with conspiracy theories and so on and so forth?
Well, I mean, I as I said, we live in a world that's rife now. That's part and parcel of our, people born in, I don't know, 2000 or whatever, grow up with that. It's not strange. When this was on, it was strange.
Yes.
Even though it was the 60s and there was all the, weird, but it was still sort of like, this was a bit stranger than even, as I said, it was something that you would find more on, off Broadway, theater, avant-garde theater, than, how to go out of your way to find, maybe, rather than on television. And even with, when you have TV shows portraying the hippies and taking drugs, it's all rather, it's all toned down and all that kind of thing. It isn't really disruptive. It was a way for, the mainstream public culture to absorb that and make it part of it and maybe neutralize it in some way. But this was different. But now we live in a world that's all like this. I mean, I've written about this in some of my books, and how we, the whole idea, the whole reality, non-reality, truth, false, the real thing and the simulation, all that, the barrier between the two is completely permeable and perforated, and the two is sliding into it. And we, it's part, I mean, AI, everything. We live in a world that's like all this, well, I think in many ways, it's probably cliche, but shows like The Prisoner and other movies in the 70s and where the whole rise of the computer, and the computer gets out of control, and blah blah blah, and takes over and all that kind of stuff. It's like this is pre-echoes of where we are. I mean, is where we are now, was this sort of seeing it in advance, or did it give us the blueprint to make that happen? Like, okay, oh, it could be like this. Oh yeah, not that we want to do it to make all the bad things happen, but yeah, let's check out, let's see what we can do with this artificial intelligence and all that kind of thing. So I don't know. I mean, I'm of an age where I think like, ooh, I don't know. I'm concerned about this to some degree, but I do think, a lot of these films and shows from that time sort of were a pre-echo of that. And this Prisoner in particular, because I think it encapsulated in, 17 episodes, a world that we live in now. Not as much fun as the series, because it isn't the 60s, that it isn't kind of, well, it's all a bit wacky and kooky, but it's like, yeah, what is real now? We don't really know anymore, or, and there's people actively engaged in taking advantage and, increasing that ambiguity about it and all that. So yeah, we live in the world that The Prisoner presented, well in advance of it. But that's, genius often does that. What was it? Great things cast their shadows before them, and artists with the antennae, pick up on it, and they can see where it goes, and they often probably don't know exactly where they're going with it, but they're being carried with, you know, with the kind of idea and inspiration. And I guess that's the other thing too. I mean, he was an auteur, you know, McGoohan. Like, it was like, this is his thing. And I would think in the, if it was financially a success, if it went, if it, you know, really went off in the States, maybe it would have continued, you know, more. Although I don't know, you know, what could you have done? You know, I haven't had a chance to watch it. Like, I think he said 7 episodes were sort of the best, and that would tell the story. I've not had a chance to, and I don't know exactly. I mean, the DVD set that I have, I don't know exactly, you know, what sequence it is in compared to other sequences. So there's all that kind of thing too, you know, that you know, did you watch them in the right sequence and all that? So, but you know, wasn't there a plan that he was supposed to carry on and like Drake, travel like around the world and you know, go to different places, and then they'd be after him somehow to get him, like The Fugitive or something like that, you know, get him back or something. I remember reading that somewhere. There was some idea, but I mean, I think it is what it is. You know, it's very much that, and it's like, at least what I've seen, I can't see like, well, you know, what would you do? Because we're here again, we're talking about it. So I mean, there must be, you know, people must, I wonder, you know, do you have like Bayreuth, where you get like all the prisoner fans together and they watch all 17 episodes in a you know, a marathon kind of thing, and you know, have a well, I guess they do, they have those societies that meet in Port Marion, and so
Yeah, there's the Number 6 festival in Port Marion every summer, and
But I agree with you. I think that it is self-sufficient as it is. I mean, you don't really need to go any further than what McGoohan did in 1967, 68, I think. It's like, I mean, people now continue to talk about Twin Peaks, continuing Twin Peaks after season 3. And I personally think that all's been said. I mean, you
have to be quadruplet peaks then, right?
Yes, exactly. No, but I do agree with the fact that, you know, sometimes you don't need to say more. I mean, that's
well, there you go. That makes it you know, a work of art. It's self-complete, and you go back to it again. You know, so who knows? Maybe 10 years from now, I'll watch it again and all of that. One of the interesting things that I did come across was that the comic book artist Jack Kirby, who I was a great fan of, you know, this guy with Stan Lee created the Fantastic Four, and you know, the Iron Man and Thor and all that sort of thing. But it must have been in the 70s or the 80s, but he had planned to do a comic book version of The Prisoner. And then it got you know, sort of dropped, but there are, you know, sketches. And he had done one of 2001, I know, in the 70s as well. So yeah, that would have been interesting. It would have been interesting how what his sort of rendition of it would have been. So yeah, I think it is very much what it is, and you know, just leave it there. Don't, you know, don't touch and try to turn it into, you know, something else. And because it's the sort of thing you can be endlessly interpreted, you know. And I'm sure I forget their names, but I know there were certain theorists, you know, in that world, and they argue with each other, and you know, this no, he's absolutely wrong, and kind of thing. And it's like, that's the great thing. You create this whole, you know, well, in the UK they have the word anorak, you know, for someone who's a real, you know, devotee of one of those sorts of things. It comes in the jacket they sort of wear, and it's like that you get down to the minutia, little tiny details and all that sort of thing. And that's yeah, so you've created a real myth, you know.
Yeah. And I find it uncanny the ways in which The Prisoner both reflects the time in which it was made, with some obvious political associations, of course. But I also was thinking about some of the episodes that you cited and certain themes that come up in them, and how extremely relevant they are today, as you've already mentioned. You talked about the chimes of Big Ben, and there's the wooden partition that separates Patrick McGoohan from the woman who clearly has an Eastern European accent, and it feels like a direct visual symbol for the divide between East and West, which we sadly are still experiencing today with various political and cultural battles. And I also thought about the surveillance society that we see that seems so incredibly innovative for the time, but this idea of constantly being watched and not having any privacy, no separation of private and public space in the village. So I'm just wondering, having grown up with The Prisoner and having lived in the political climate of the 60s and having witnessed then what comes and what follows and what we're living through today, how do you feel about the politics in the show and how that may have shifted for you as a viewer?
Well, I mean, I was a kid, when I first watched it, so I wasn't too, politically minded. But having lived in London now for 28 years, it is the most watched city. It has, there's, CCTV cameras everywhere. It's all over the place. So it's ironically, even before The Prisoner, Orwell, Big Brother. I mean, that again, it's like, oh my, yeah, of course it's a cliche and all that, but the most, one of the most, I don't know if it's on anymore, but one of the most popular reality TV shows is Big Brother. But oh yeah, so I always get the feeling, okay, is that saying, oh, you guys, you were so hysterical then about all this, but oh, to us it's like, well, we're way beyond it or something. Or do they even have that amount of thought in it? It's just like, yeah, this is, oh, Big Brother's watching you. Yeah, well, no, you're watching Big Brother now. Oh yeah, that works. So but I just, it's the sort of thing which it's a cliche, but it's like, did you get it, at all? But no, but I walk around, if you walk around London, you see, and if you look for them, but if you don't look too much, because they notice you looking at them, they'll get in touch with you. They'll ask you, oh, why were you looking at that camera? Blah, 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 so, but it's, and more, I mean, so there is, and it is eerily for me becoming, as I said, I'm of an age, and it's eerily for me becoming so much like what I would see as a movie about the future. I mean, even like shopping malls. I mean, they all, if you ever watch, Logan's Run, it looks like, oh yes, it takes place in a shopping mall. Yeah, but this was before there were those sorts of things, so it's all that. But no, it's eerily like that. And even now, like on the underground, on the tube, and I understand why they're there, but there are all these signs about, I guess a variety of different, how should we say, offenses that you just to remind you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that and you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. And there's also these ones like, if this happens, try to do this and try to do that. It's like, try to interfere. It's like, and I always wonder, yes, okay, I understand, yes, if someone's being attacked, I should help them, but who is going to help me when I get my head handed to me? I'm again, you just want, it's sort of like, it's all these little social instructions, and it's sort of, it reminds me like, I've seen this in a movie somewhere, but it's not a movie. This is life, and the getting to the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. So I don't want to sound like a Cassandra or something like that, but it just seems eerily like that to me. So yeah, I mean, that's in that political sense, I think he was very much, and also all the other things, the credit cards, the cordless phones, and it was, all this kind of stuff that, again, was odd. Even though the phones were huge, but still the first ones we had were like that anyway. It seemed that this was stuff that he picked up on, or maybe it seemed like, yeah, eventually this would happen. But no, that's the thing that I think is, and McGoohan must have, well, I guess he was living in California, was that towards the end of his life? So it'd be hard to have CCTVs in California because nobody walks in Los Angeles. Like, you can follow the cars. That's why they have the helicopters and all that. So but I don't know if he was aware that London had become like that. So I mean, I don't know, is Paris like that? Do they have as many
There's a decent amount of them, but not as much as in the United Kingdom. But what is always shocking to me is that we have so many CCTV in Western Europe, which is basically the safest place on the planet, and so little in the United States and other much more dangerous areas.
But they'll say, well, it works.
Yeah.
It works. You're so safe because we're watching you all the time, and but no, I know, no, I know. So,
Your
but yeah,
your
I mean that.
underground. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
Sorry.
no, no, no.
No, I was just going to say your underground experience reminded me that we've replaced be seeing you with what is it that they say? See it, say it, sort it.
All right, see it, say it, sorted. That's right. That's right. Well, it says if you see anything strange, and it's like, but do you have an hour? Oh, hold on, I'll tell you how many strange things. Do you really want to know? Or it's like, or at the supermarkets where they say, what is it, unexpected item in the checkout, and that's me.
Oh,
I always think so.
Based fruit.
Yeah. So, well, but no, I mean, again, it strikes me as very much, like that. So, and I'm sure we can find, maybe not exactly the same sorts of things. We could probably find similar sorts of echoes in some of the other, products from that time. But I mean, it's the Philip K. Dick though thing now. I mean, that's the world where it's that plus all the paranoia. So you don't get, I mean, Six doesn't come across as, a paranoid kind of character. He comes across as someone he's determined. He will not give, he's, God, what's the, Bartleby the Scrivener, who says, I'd rather not, he just, I refuse. So, whereas then the different heroes or anti-heroes in the Dick sorts of things always seem, they're all rather wild and hysterical, and things are popping up around them all the time. So it's a more heightened kind of atmosphere with the same kind of ambiguity about reality, but it's much more and now the technology is even as you say, the technology we have today this enables that at I would say an alarming rate. So
So do you think this means that we did not truly listen to what those authors were telling us in the 60s and 70s?
When do we ever listen to anything? I mean, you listen later. Some people listen, some people get it. People in power usually don't. And if you think about it, well, that makes sense, because they're in power because they don't listen. In power because they're and they want power too. So and it's always, I guess in that context, it's always the immediate the immediate gain, or it's dealing with the immediate thing rather than the long range kind of consequences of it, which the visionaries are the ones who are aware of that, and artists among them, and they can see it coming, and they I would say they hope, and I think McGoohan wants to affect change through persuasion and intelligence and reaching out and creating an atmosphere of asking questions and doubt and uncertainty, which is uncomfortable. But if you're uncomfortable, you'll do something, to change, to make yourself, not necessarily more comfortable, but to make, somehow, solve the problem. So, but that's a slower process, but I would say that's what the artists in general do, the ones who are interested in that kind of thing, in some way, kind of persuade, show what the problem might be, and perhaps offer a kind of, although, some of the people, they show what the problem is and they say, that's it, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing to be done. You have, the Samuel Beckett's of the world, and people like that, or, it's just like this, and I'll show you how it's like this, over and over again. And we can, commiserate together, but, don't expect anything to happen. But, I don't know. I mean, I guess, it's May 68, it's happening around the same time as the prison and all that. And that was certainly a kind of revolution of the imagination. Take your dreams for reality and things of that sort. So I think, again, not necessarily any direct connection, but part of a similar kind of, what do you want to call it, wave kind of wave of change, imagination, and trying to see things differently against, crashing against the, the shores of, whatever, complacency. My God, that was horrible. But if I wrote that in something, I would edit it out, but it's okay.
But what is interesting about the prisoner, I think, is that the people in power I mean, number one is basically number six. I mean, what does it say about the people in power?
Mm. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Do you think? Yeah, you say number six is number one. You would
I
say?
mean, you do
Because
see.
some of them say the number one was the rocket. And he even says at some point, "I want to be the first man on the moon." It's supposed to be, but that just seems like something they had to put into like, let's end this thing, because it doesn't seem like to me like this is all it was about, like Britain wanting to put the first. They already got there. H.G. Wells had put somebody on the moon already, Cavour, I have to say, if that's the big denouement, I kind of felt a little like, oh, I even forgot that happened in a way, because it just kind of goes off, it's like a Monty
Very
Python
brief.
thing. It just kind of goes off in the background. And then,
Mm.
so I didn't buy that bit. I personally felt that was something they just threw in because maybe the producer, somebody thought we need to have something like that, so otherwise it's this, some James Bondy kind of thing. But what happens? Where does the rocket? It crashes, right? It doesn't quite make it, but
We don't see actually what happens to the
but
rocket.
that's the thing. I'm trying to know what happens to the rockets. That's what I mean. It's just kind of, oh yeah, the rocket goes off. Okay.
But we do see briefly.
Napoleon's.
Yes, but we do see briefly the person under the mask revealing his face, and it's the same as.
Yes.
And I thought that was interesting, as if he had a doppelganger or a dark side of his own personality that was also doing this to himself.
Yeah. Well, I see that. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Well, I mean, who is number one other than yourself? Looking out for number one. I mean, are we all? He was looking out for number one, and aren't we all looking out for number one in a certain way? So I mean, not in that kind of sense, but yeah. Well, I guess, but that's the sort of, I guess. Okay, we can. This is a. Yes, that's right. It's profound, but it's also kind of a common trope. You're looking at it's the mirror, and the mirror is you. It's like, oh, something like that. It's like, yeah, but it is who but you're right. You asked this earlier. Who is he? He never says his name. At the one time, it's Peter Smith, and it's when he's trying to get back into his flat there and all that. But that sounds like John Doe, right? Or could have been anything, we don't know. And even if he was Drake, he's not going to say it. Why would he say that? He haven't given away any information, before. So why would he give away any real information then? So yeah, there is, it is this intense quest for identity, and they want to know who he is, and he wants to know who he is, but he wants to know who he is before they know who he is, and he doesn't necessarily want to tell them once he does know. But I mean, again, but in the end, he's friends with, sort of friends, or fellow travelers, certainly, or fellow escapees with, Leo McGoohan and the Angelo Muscat, and Alexis Canner, right? So, they all kind of, I shouldn't say, they've bonded in a certain way through that experience.
And it seems important to somehow to demonstrate that he's not just an individualist, that he's willing to act and collaborate with others when it's something constructive, when it's not in a totalitarian setting, that he is willing to collaborate. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Alexis Canner, because I think of all the other performers besides Patrick McGoohan, he just gives such a stunning performance in several episodes, and he's just got such a strong presence. And we mentioned the countercultural movement of the 60s earlier, and for me, he just completely embodies that in the last episode. What do you think about Alexis Canner's character?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, he struck me as someone from, who represented that. I mean, the top hat kind of thing, and all that, sort of thing too. So I mean, it was a sort of, well, I guess he's supposed to be the counterculture, hippie, but all that, but he's appropriating the dress of the established, the high society and all that kind of thing. So that again, that's a sort of, saying something, breaking of the boundaries and all that other thing. But I just wanted to say, just when you were saying about him, willing to work together, that whole episode where he runs, for the government, and he's trying to get people, to join, to work together and all that kind of thing. He's reaching out to them, so he's not necessarily only out for himself to free himself. he wants to help others as well. But again, I guess that the thing that he learns is, who do you trust? And again, those guys, Alexis Canada, Liam McGoohan, and all those guys, they're in the same kind of situation. They don't know whether they can trust him as well. But no, I think he gave a good performance. And I mean, I don't know how many people can keep up them bones, for that long without it getting, a little de trop. But it was like he managed to pull it off. Did he choose that? Did McGoohan choose that? It's it's an old spiritual and all that kind of. Was it just sort of some wacky, at the moment? Okay, go for it.
I just know that Patrick McGoohan has gone on record as saying that for him, Alexis really embodied the countercultural movement. He loved his kind of anti-authoritarian stance, which I think you can just feel so well in that last episode. Like he is just functioning on another level from the rest of us. He's just not interested in this kind of banal, everyday regulation. What I appreciated so much.
Well, it's interesting McGoohan would say that, because again, he comes across as rather conservative, character, certainly, about sex and I don't know. I get the impression he was a heavy drinker. I don't know what his ideas about drugs were or anything like that. But so I don't know, if he himself, well, he must, he must have made references to that, in interviews about it somehow, that this, maybe in some way, what was happening, in the 60s then in some way was a reflection of the kind of issues and concerns that he was dealing with in the program.
I was wondering if you had something to say about the use of the music, especially in the last episode, which is so powerful about the way it uses the Beatles among other. It comes as a surprise after the duration of the series, and then you have this you can see actually when he walks to his throne several jukeboxes with records being put on play. So did you have something to say about this aspect?
Well, I mean, first off, the theme music was one of the great themes of, it's up there with the Avengers theme music, I would say. It's like, I found myself, I didn't watching it again. I didn't skip introduction. I didn't do that because I wanted to hear it. It was, and it's an interesting piece of music too. I mean, it's like ba ba ba. He just does a lot with ba ba ba. He does ba 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 in different sorts of ways throughout that whole theme, and it just really works. One of the things I wanted to say before I forget, in the very first episode of this edition I have, when he's going into the underground car park, the car goes below the barrier. And then when he pushes the door open into, into the office, it says way out at the top. So he's going through the exit way.
All right.
And I never saw that in any of the other episodes, but those are so obvious. He's going under the radar, and he's going, he's going up the down staircase, as it were. So he's obviously a maverick and a rebel. But again, that just thinking of the theme music that came to me. But it's, I mean, it's a real satire. All you need is love and all that. I mean, that was sort of like, okay, he's aware of the counterculture, but he also probably knows that that's a bit naive. I would think, that you don't, you can't do without love, let's say, but it's not all you need. It's not the only nutrition. It's there's other, man does not live by love alone, we might say, and that kind of thing. And that itself was even, more radical than just bringing in the counterculture stuff. That was like a certain, a critique of a kind of children's crusade naivete about much of the counterculture, which it gives it its charming side to it, but it's also something that it seemed that's why it exploded 2 years later or whatever. But no, I think it was and it also related it to contemporary time. Not to say, I mean, it's not necessarily timeless, but we don't exactly know exactly when it's going on. We don't quite know exactly when it's going on. It starts out okay. You see him in London, but that that's that Buckingham Palace Road has looked like that for quite some time, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be, contemporary. So, but bringing in the music then does make it very contemporary and very much of the moment. And at the end, and I guess it's also like, let's go for it, let's have the big finale.
Yes.
Let's pull out all the stops and, shoot off all the fireworks,
And I'm not a music specialist, but am I right in thinking that there are some sounds that they may have riffed from Mission Impossible? There's a sound effect, for example, when usually there's some kind of attack, there's going to be a conflict or a fight, and you hear that dun 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 dun.
I have to go now. I have to go back and that's the reason to go back and look. No.
I'm
No,
not too
I
clear on the date,
don't
so
know.
I could be wrong.
But what also struck me is that there is that kind of what do you want to call it? Music concrete kind of thing. It's like these
Yes.
kind, sorts of things, which is that would have been very strange, And I thought, that was because I didn't catch that. I wouldn't have caught that the first time around. It's like, oh yeah, this is, and then he brings in what is it? Is it during the political? Was it All for One? Is that what that one? And they had that kind of like marching tune. It's almost like The Great Escape, not quite, but which is. Did they know that was like that? Is it that's there's the I mean, when I was a kid, that was like one of the big, World War II. It was on 2 nights. It was such a long movie. I had to watch it one night, and part 2 was on the other night, and had that great theme. And had all, Steve McQueen and James Coburn, and all these different people, David McCallum, Ilya Kuryakin. In any case, I'm drifting off, but that. As I was watching it, hearing that, I wonder, did they know that? Because it sounds a little, and that would have made sense. Great Escape, getting out of the, the village, kind of thing. But it is something that comes up later on. They use that in a couple different episodes, and it is like a motif. It's like a sort of Wagnerian motif that comes in. And no, I think he knew what he was doing. Although it sounds probably is like, okay, stuff happened and they used it. Which means real creativity was going on. The magic happens. But it's all of a piece. I mean, the music struck me as not just music, mood music to go, something suspenseful, something. It's just it seems to be saying something about what's happening in the scene at the time. So I think it's a conscious, contribution to what's going on.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of intertextual kind of references happening within The Prisoner and with the music. I haven't seen anyone really do a lot of research about that. That might be a really interesting thing for one of our listeners to pursue if they want to look into trivia behind these different musical bits that we hear throughout the series.
Can you tell us about what you're currently working on? What's coming up soon?
Right. Well, I've got a book coming out. Comes out in the States in June and UK in July, and it's a biography of a fellow named Maurice Nicoll, whom I don't know. No, I don't think most people don't know who he was, but he started out as an early follower of Jung here in England. So about a century ago, he would have been a Jungian psychologist having a practice on Harley Street, which is a very prestigious street in London. A lot of doctors and have their practices there. But he attended a lecture by the Russian philosopher P.D. Uspensky, who had only recently come to London after being freed from a white Russian refugee camp in Constantinople. I'm telling you the whole story. But Uspensky was. He had become a surprise bestseller. A book of his translated in English, unbeknownst to him, while he was trying to escape from the Russian Civil War, had become a bestseller in the States and in the U.S. And an obscure book about, not an obscure book, but a book about metaphysics, a very kind of, Tertium Morgana, it was called. In any case, long story short, he winds up being brought to London. He's giving lectures. This guy Nicoll attends one of his lectures, and he leaves Jung and he becomes a disciple of Uspensky. And then he goes and spends a year with Gurdjieff and in his Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man at the Prairie in Fontainebleau, just outside of Paris. And so I got asked to write the book because not too many people have Jung, Uspensky, and Gurdjieff for teachers, and I've written about all of them.
Mm.
But the strange thing was that not too long ago, 1,000+ page diary was uncovered by this guy.
Uh-huh.
And among many other interesting things in it, it's becomes absolutely clear that he was totally obsessed with sex, which is not, too surprising, but it was an obsession he pursued with one hand, if I can put it delicately, in that way. And it made for a very strange reading material to write a biography of this fellow with all this sort of thing. So we'll see what happens. It's bound to make some waves in the Gurdjieffian world. I don't know if you're familiar with the fourth way teaching. He lived in Paris during the 30s and during the occupation and all of that. But in any case, that's coming out later this year. And I mentioned before I think you started recording, I have this map called "In the Footsteps of Inspector Maigret," and it's a map. About 40 different locations in the 75 Maigret novels, Simenon's Maigret. 63 of them take place in Paris, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's a map of 40 locations in Paris from the novels and stories. So a murder, on the Saint-Martin Canal, and then something in Montmartre, and then something in Les Halles, and all this sort of thing. So it was fun to do. So that's coming out with any luck at the end of next month. So
wonderful.
We'll definitely look for that. And I just have to let you know that we're sitting in our flat in Paris, a 5 minutes walk from Canal Saint-Martin. So we'll definitely have to check out.
I have very fond memories. When my sons were little, we went there and we walked up to the big park, and there's the city of science sort of thing up that way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I have some fond memories of that. Oh, there you go. Synchronicity.
Yes.
That works. So
that's a map of the village as well.
Well, I don't. There probably are. They've said if you have any other ideas, and when I was doing a bit of homework on this, I thought, oh, maybe not, but I thought there must be already. So I don't know. But have you been? I've not been. Maybe.
Yes.
You've been to Port Marion?
Yes. Oh, yeah. A wonderful place. Very unique. I think that it would be wonderful even if the prisoner hadn't been shot there, because it is so it's collecting architectural styles from all around the world and recreating this Italian.
It was postmodern before postmodern, right? He was
taking
bits and pieces before that and putting from other places and sort of bricolage kind of thing.
Works. I mean, it is a very pleasurable, very enjoyable place that seems totally out of place, but at the same time very ingrained in this Welsh portion of the UK. It really is a wonderful place to visit. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I'll have to go.
I thought about it when you mentioned the fact that on one hand, there are these elements of the 60s in the series, and at the same time, it's difficult to say what time period we're in. And I thought that's also the Port Marion effect, because it feels like this place out of time somehow that just has always been there. But we don't exactly know how it got there, but it's been there and it's timeless.
Well, those are the best places. Yeah, right. You always go back to them.
Right. We usually close the podcast by asking our guest if there is perhaps a question we haven't asked that you think we should have asked.
Or if you wish we had asked.
Oh, let me think. I haven't thought of that. Well, I mean, one thing we didn't mention was this sort of effect or whatever, this little trick where they have somebody play different roles. So you have the same face turning up, but they're in different identities again.
Yeah.
So that's another, that's part of the whole, I guess, identity sort of thing. Also a part of the kind of rep, that repertory theater that viewing came from. The sort of ensemble. Okay, just get out there, and just go play the waiter for 2 seconds and come back in. So again, something that, should we say, was a necessity in some ways. I think in an early part of his career became, something that it had an effect. It has this kind of strange, wait, didn't I just see that, that kind of thing. So yeah, so that was just something that we might have mentioned, but we didn't. But there we go.
Yeah, that is one of the really fun aspects of the series, and we had mentioned how much Alexis Canner is important to the series.
Yeah,
he did have an uncredited role, hopping in once to play a photographer in an episode.
Thank you so much for having spent this hour and a quarter with us. We really appreciate all your comments about the prisoner, and
we appreciate your writing and your music as well. So thank you.
Oh well, absolutely my pleasure, and it was delightful. So, well, maybe we can do it again sometime.
That'd be wonderful.
It would be a great pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to After Images. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and follow After Images podcast on social media.
After Images.